So I had a thought today. Um, I pick up on a lot of stuff almost subconsciously that catches my attention when I'm reading news articles or watching a video or whatever, and it deals a lot with language. There was a term that was created back in the 70s. It's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It was by Richard Bandler and John Grinder back in California back in the 1970s. It's loosely based off Norman Vincent Peale's Power Positive Thinking that he did back in the 50s. So the basics, the very basics of NLP is change your words and it'll change your thoughts. By the way, if you're wonder why I'm looking down, it's because I actually did notes this time because I wanted to kind of make sure I got it right. So basically, NLP is change your words or change your vocabulary and you'll change your thoughts. I'll add to that. Changing words will change thoughts. Changing thoughts will change the narrative. Changing the narrative changes the truth. When I read or watch video, whatever, I pick up on words. I pick up on word selection. I pick up on words that are avoided or not spoken. Those are the things that stand out to me. So I watch this stuff or read it, and things just step out to me. It's like alarm bells, like klaxon and red lights and stuff that go off when I read articles or newsprint, whatever. So I've read several different books on NLP. I find it interesting, but I see it happening. So I just wanted to point it out to you guys to get you to kind of see what I see and get into my head a little bit, if you will, with regards to why I pick up certain things and why I think the way I do about certain things. Fast forward to today, there's a couple different things that are huge, and narratives have shifted because of them. One of them is virtue signaling, and the other one is identity politics. Virtue signaling is, oh, look at me, I care about the downtrodden, right? Identity politics is somebody that can find racism in everything, right? And that's why things are the way they are. And both of those fall under the term politically correct, because now it's politically acceptable to say that all the downtrodden, all the bad things that are happening to people is because of the institutional racism, right? It's not, but that's what we're being told a lot. So I looked up the definition of politically correct. I'm going to read this so to make sure I get it right. Politically correct is a term used to describe language, policies, or measures that are intended to avoid offense or disadvantage to members of a particular group in society, such as race, gender, culture, or sexual orientation. The term politically correct has also been used as a bludgeon on people. If you say something that's off color, if you say something that's not accepted, well, then you're not following the etiquette of politically correct. It doesn't affect me because I give a fuck about your feelings or whatever, but many people fall into that and they change their own language. Some people do it out of not wanting to offend people, and I'll get into that a little bit too. Some people do it because it's the right thing to do now. It's the hip in. You're in the main crowd. You're part of the herd if you say things the right way. But it goes back to NLP. Changing your words changes your thoughts. Changes your thoughts, changes the narrative. It's been used strategically. It's a very impactful, I'm going to say, weapon used against people. And I'll get into some more of this and the way it's being used as a weapon here in a little bit. But politically correct is a controlling language. You're only allowed to say what's in the bubble of being politically correct. Now, who determines the size of that bubble? Well, who does? What's politically correct for you may not be politically correct for him, which may kind of be politically correct for her. So politically correct is not an objective standard. It's a very subjective standard. And the subjectiveness changes based upon the topic, based upon where we are in a timeline. There's no objective standard to politically correct. And then you have to throw in that there are words in the English language that don't exist in other languages. So a word that you might use in the English language that might offend somebody or somebody might take offense to doesn't even exist in French or Spanish or whatever. So there's no objective standard to the word or words, and there's no objective to the language. It's all very subjective. But it's used to control the language, which is used to control the narrative, which ultimately is used to control the truth. Controlling truth. Access to the truth is very limited. Or it's a very long road to travel. You have to, all the pitfalls and all this other stuff you have to go through to get to the truth. You get ridiculed and all the other stuff because you're a conspiracy theorist until you get to the truth, show the truth, print the truth, and then you may or may not get vindicated later, but you get what I'm saying. I'll give an example of controlling language, and I'll give an example of how words are used selectively, which changes narrative and changes truth. Two words that are used interchangeably that are not actually correct are Republican and conservative. The two are not synonymous. They do not mean the same thing. A Republican is a political ideology. A conservative could either be political ideology or economic ideology. There is such a thing as a liberal Republican, and there is such a thing as a conservative Democrat. That's not, those two terms are not oxymorons. They're very true and very descriptive. But when you read or listen to somebody talking, somebody that's far on the left, that's anti-right, watch how they interchange the two words based upon the topic they're using. They'll sometimes do it in the same conversation based upon the context of what they're talking about at that particular point in time. Sometimes they use Republican, sometimes they use conservative. They control that narrative. Instead of saying the word conservative the whole time, which will alter a meaning or alter the narrative, or using the term Republican, same thing, they alternate between the two. If you start going too far one way, they'll change the term. They're changing their language to change the narrative. And you can do the same thing if you're a left-leaning person. You're listening to somebody who's a right-leaning person talk about the left. I always say, I do not hate Democrats. We have a difference in political ideology, but I'm okay with that. I do not like liberals or progressives. I will never interchange the two words. If I'm talking about a Democrat, I will always use the word Democrat. If I'm talking about a liberal, I always use the word liberal, which has two different meanings. One's a political ideology, first and foremost. I don't have any problems with Democrats. We disagree, but fine. But liberals, progressives, no. But I will always use that same word every time I'm speaking to somebody. I don't interchange the two on purpose. But if you stop and look and think and listen to what, or pay attention to what you're reading or listening to what you're hearing, watch how the terms are interchanged. They do not mean the same thing. Conservative does not equal Republican, nor does Republican equal conservative. They don't. Going to offended and how NLP plays a role. The saying used to be, I take offense to that. And if some of us, you're my age or whatever, you'll remember that term. You haven't heard it a lot. You don't hear it anymore. What is it you hear now? You hear, "You offended me." Just changing a few words changes the whole narrative, changes the whole meaning, and changes the responsibility. When the saying used to be, "I take offense to that," that's that individual owning their own emotions, their own thought process. I made the decision to be offended by what you said. Okay? Saying "you offended me" transfers ownership of the responsibility of that decision. You are now responsible for my feelings. You offended me, therefore you are responsible for what I say or do. It's your fault that I'm mad. It's your fault that I'm upset or whatever, right? Do you understand? I hope this makes sense. So NLP plays a part and always has. It's just one of those just below the surface things that if you don't pay attention to or don't know about, you probably won't catch it. I catch it all the time. I call people out on it quite regularly. Used to be with the saying, when the saying was, I take offense to that, you owned your response to it, whether it be to walk away, stay in debate, stay and argue, or punch somebody in the face. You owned it. That was your decision to be offended. It was your decision to decide what reaction to have to it. So now when you say "you offended me," you've now put the ownership of your own actions on somebody else. They're now responsible for what you did. They can be prosecuted. Now, I'm not saying necessarily strictly in the legal sense, but they can be prosecuted for your reactions. How is that anywhere near right? Somebody could have said something that is extremely offensive. You could simply decide not to be offended. That's what I do. I read stuff all day long and listen to newscasts and listen to podcasts and YouTube videos or whatever. Somebody says something that I find to be stupid or offensive, whatever, gone. Even face to face. If you say something that's offensive when you're trying to get under my skin or whatever, it's not going to work. What I simply choose not to be offended. But if you choose to be offended, it's your choice first and foremost. But "you offended me" now means you are responsible for my reactions. You are letting somebody else control your own emotions. It's weak-minded. It's immature. And it casts off the net of responsibility, so you feel you're no longer responsible. So now you can do whatever you want to that person because they said something that's offensive. Being offended is a choice. Your reactions to being offended are a choice. You can choose whatever you want, whatever course of action you think you need to take. You can, by all means, walk away or whatever, but it's your choice. Control your choice. Control your language. Don't let people control your language. Pay attention to the language that they use. I'm going to get into another thing. It falls under the language thing that happens very frequently. And those of you that have been in any kind of debate class, whether it's high school, college, whatever, I'm sure you pick these out quite frequently, but a lot of people don't. They're fallacies. And some are so common that we've accepted them as normal. So one of the biggest ones that happens is an ad hominem attack or an ad hominem fallacy. Using the term right wing, far right wing, left wing, far left wing. When somebody's labeled or somebody is labeling somebody else as right wing, they're segregating them into the extreme end of the right or the extreme end of the left. You're pushing them into a realm where you impugn their reputation. These people are on a very far edge of the herd. They're not in the mainstream. They're weirdos. They're not to be taken truthfully. They're conspiracy theorists, another label that's always used on people. Anybody that goes against the grain of the mainstream, or goes against the grain of the herd, or sits on the fringes and asks questions, what are they labeled as? Nut jobs, conspiracy theorists, far right wing, far left wing. That's an ad hominem. You're insulting, attacking, personal attack on an individual because of their stance on a specific subject, or their stance in general is outside of the norm. They're used, an ad hominem is used to impugn your reputation, to impugn their credibility, just simply by a label, which is an ad hominem. Another one that's used, and this is another one, if you got to pay attention to this one. People use appeal to authority fallacies all the time, and this is typically how it happens. Talking like a news broadcast, when they bring on an expert in whatever field to bolster their narrative. Let's just say it's a medical issue. This is Dr. So-and-so who has this degree, who has this experience, who studied at this school, who wrote this paper. They'll go through the list. They'll go through their resume, right? And then get into it. They're establishing an appeal to authority argument, which is a fallacy, but that's what they're doing. They're instilling in you that this person has all these credibilities and credentials, so should be believed. So what he says is impugnable. You can't question it. He's got these degrees. If you question it, you're a conspiracy theorist. However, again, same scenario, news media interviewing or questioning an expert. Now, if they happen to be questioning a doctor that is opposed to their narrative, they will not list their credentials. They most of the time give them the respect of their title as doctor in this instance, in this case, but they won't list their credentials. Have you ever noticed that? I wonder why they do that. Credentials and resumes of somebody that supports the narrative they're pushing, strictly a title for one that opposes their narrative. Another example of that is what happens with President Trump. Look at when you're watching news broadcasts, whatever news agency you pay attention to, listen to how they talk about or address President Trump. It's either Donald Trump or just Trump, for those that are diametrically opposed to him, and it's President Trump or President Donald J. Trump if you go to the other end of that spectrum. It's language. They're using language as I'm going to say weapon, or they're using language to their advantage to push a narrative to the people that are watching or reading. Another one they use, and I made a post about this the other day, is a correlation argument fallacy as opposed to a causation argument fallacy. Just trying to come up with a good example of this, and this is kind of the best one I could come up with, is a causational argument is if you take 2 and add 2 more to it, you end up with 4. Causation. You're adding something together to make a larger group, right? That addition caused a larger group. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You really can't argue with that. The correlation part comes in, okay, well, if 2 plus 2 equals 4, then what makes up the 2? It's 1 plus 1, right? Well, if this 1 is definitely right, but this one is a I'm going to say stretch, or doesn't really constitute a 1, these other 2 do, what do you have? You no longer have 2 plus 2 equals 4. You have 2 plus the narrative 2, which actually equals 3.5, but they push it off as 4. I hope that makes sense to you guys. Pay attention to the correlation used to push off as or sell off as a causational argument. A correlation argument doesn't come to a conclusion. It's an approach taken by people that are trying to get to a solution or a conclusion. Well, think Boolean logic, if, then, and, or. But if the two correlated items are not the same, then you cannot get to a causation conclusion. It happens all the time. It's very subtle. And if you don't know the field, or if you're not familiar or exposed to the field or the issue they're talking about it, a lot of times you won't catch it. But pay attention. Pay attention to the causation versus a correlation argument. If they try to pass off a correlation argument by giving a conclusion, they're pushing a narrative. If they're giving you a causational argument which has a solid conclusion, then they're generally pushing the truth. Just pay attention. Another one that happens, and this is part of NLP, but an indirect part, it's complete avoidance. If there's a topic that's a hot topic, it's the topic of the day, right? And all of a sudden, people stop talking about it. Now, I'm not talking about just the media, I'm talking about people in general. That's what you need to pay attention to, especially when you're talking politics and government. If they're showing you the right hand, don't pay any attention to that. It's all bullshit. It's a narrative they're pushing on you. Watch the left hand. Watch what they're not showing you. So as an example, right now, there's a lot of stuff going on, obviously, with COVID and all the other stuff. It takes up 24/7 news coverage, right? It's everything you see. The numbers are constantly scrolling across the screen. But at the same time this is going on, there's a whole lot of stuff that's come out about the whole Russian collusion stuff that is proven. A lot of footnotes have been declassified. There's more information coming out that's been declassified that shows the FBI lied. But what's not being talked about? There are some people talking about it, obviously, because I know it, I'm watching it. But your mainstream people and your friends and family, or people that you thought were, mildly savvy with the government and politics, they're not talking about it. That's what you need to pay attention to. The stuff going on with the declassified documents right now is just mind-shattering, breaking the glass ceiling, however you want to word that, with regards to what the FBI did, how they lied, how they doctored information, how they left out exculpatory information in their FISA warrants, which breaks the law. There's all kinds of stuff going on with it, but they're not talking. They, being the mainstream press, the legacy media, are not talking about it. The only people that are talking about it are your conspiracy theorists. And then another one that they use a lot is a straw man argument. The most recent example I can give on this is Christopher Wallace from Fox News was interviewing Nancy Pelosi, I think Saturday or Sunday. And he asked her straightforward about how she's criticizing the president for all of his inaction and stuff she's accusing him for, but yet almost a month after he put in the ban against direct flights from China, she did a video of her out walking in Chinatown out in San Francisco saying, come on out, blah, 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 don't listen to this president, that kind of stuff, right? So he called her out on it. Well, she brought up identity politics. She brought up wanted to make sure that the Asian people weren't being discriminated against, etc. That's a straw man. That's an argument that's not the original question. It's not the original argument. It's an argument she's introducing that she is introducing that she knows the answer to, and she knows how to argue. She's avoiding the actual real argument, the real discussion. That's a straw man. It's not an argument that was being debated. It's a made-up argument that she is now debating, and she is now arguing. She changed the whole narrative based on language. NLP is a very powerful thing, even in your own world. Like if you ever read any like self-help books and positive thinking, or even Vincent Peale's books or Norman Vincent Peale's books, changing your language, the words your vocabulary, improving your vocabulary will change your mindset. It will. The way you verbalize, write, or speak will change your thoughts. So basically, there's a theory that if you do something for 6 weeks and 6 weeks straight, it becomes a habit. You could have been always using your left hand to scratch your forehead. Well, for 6 weeks, if you consciously think about not doing it with your left hand, but scratching your head with your right hand, you will then habitually scratch your right hand, or scratch your head with your right hand. The same thing applies with language. You can change your thoughts solely based upon changing your language. Language being vocabulary. If you change your vocabulary, you will change the way you think about something. That is a very, very powerful thing. When somebody is using that to their own advantage, it's a very powerful weapon. It's a very powerful way to change the truth, to change the narrative. It's a very powerful tool to redirect a mass amount of people. You can call me a fool or whatever you want. You can call me a conspiracy theorist all you want. I don't pay attention to labels. I don't care. I know what I know. And if you want to challenge me, challenge me. We can debate it. When if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't have a problem with that. But I will not be guided when I see NLP being used by the media, by politicians, by people in power, by the bankers, by whomever. It immediately sets off alarm bells, and now I'm going to pick them apart. That's what I do when I watch news articles. I've been told by a few people that I'll post something or talk about something in a way they never thought of. Well, most of the time it's because I pick up on the language. Most of the time it's because I pick up on the fallacies being presented as fact and truth. Pay attention to the language. Pay attention to straw man arguments, huge ones with politicians. They're never going to give you a yes or no answer. They're going to present the straw man argument to deflect from the main argument. Pay attention to consensus thinking. That's a correlation, a negative correlation argument. Really pay attention to the appeal to Thor fallacies that are being presented to you. Just if you get anything out of this, just pay attention to an expert that's being interviewed, and whether they are opposed or pro of whatever that person's narrative is. If they're pro, they're going to list credentials. If they're opposed, it's just going to be a title. It happens all the time. It is so subtle, so it happens almost naturally, or it's become so natural that it's just accepted. Just pay attention to it. Language will control you if you let it. Language will control your own. Somebody else's language will control your thoughts. They will push you down a path that they want you to go down versus you thinking for yourself and going down your own path. Just a thought. And I'm going to leave you with one more I came up with today. Kind of an off topic, but I created a new hashtag today. So we all know the whole Karen thing, right? The nannies, the people that tattle on everybody. They want to speak to the manager all the time. You know, they even got Karen, the female version of Karen's got their own haircut, right? So tying it to this COVID thing, with all these people that are just stay at home, the people picking up the phone, calling the police because their neighbor's got 15 people at a birthday party or whatever, right? Those kind of people. Those people that are mad at the protesters that are going on all over the country right now. They're all Karens. So in the same spirit of the OK Boomer movement, it's now OK Karen. Hashtag OK Karen. That's what people are going to start getting from me. If you come at me with the stupid shit like we've been dealing with of everybody just needs to stay at home, blah, 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 blah. Okay, Karen. That's what you're going to get. I hope you use it. I hope you spread it. And I hope it brings you great enjoyment. It already has for me within 2 hours of starting it. Have a good one.